Hello everyone, this is Sarfraz from Aristotle Prep and we are looking at passage 18 from the OG13 RC chapter. This has questions 87 to 92. So first, as always, we will read the passage, understand it in detail or as much as we need to. Then we will predict the purpose of the passage and then we will go to the questions. So the first sentence of the passage is always very important. In this case it says, in 1955, Maurice Duverger published The Political Role of Women, the first behavioralist multinational comparison of women's electoral participation ever, to use election data and survey data together. So the first sentence tells me that this passage is going to be about this particular work or book, whatever it is, The Political Role of Women. This is the first comparison of women's electoral participation that uses election data and survey data both. Okay. His study analyzed women's patterns of voting, political candidacy, and political activism in 4 European countries during the first half of the 20th century. Duverger's research findings were, so this should be interesting, what were his findings? His findings were that women voted somewhat less frequently than men, the difference narrowing the longer women had the vote. Okay, and were slightly more conservative. Keep one thing in mind, whenever in any passage you see something within brackets, you can be rest assured there will definitely be a question from that bracket. Like in this case, it says Duverger's findings were that women voted somewhat less frequently than men, and the difference narrows the longer women had the vote. So which means if a woman has had the right to vote since say 30 years compared to someone who's had the right to vote since 10 years, then the one who's had the right to vote since 30 years, her voting pattern or voting frequency would be similar or closer to the voting frequency of men vis-a-vis somebody who's only had the voting rights for 10 years. So that's what it means when it says the difference narrowing the longer women had the vote. And so one is women vote somewhat less frequently, 7 they are more conservative. Okay. The second paragraph says, Duverger's work set an early standard for the sensitive analysis of women's electoral activities. Moreover, to Duverger's credit, he placed his findings in the context of many of the historical processes that had shaped these activities. So, okay, so much is, so far it's all praise for Duverger, but the next sentence starts with however. So there's a contrast coming in now. However, since these contexts have changed over time, Duverger's approach has proved more durable than his actual findings. Alright. In addition, Duverger's discussion of his findings was hampered by his failure to consider certain specific factors important to women's electoral participation at the time he collected his data. So there was some problem in Duverger's discussion of his findings. Okay, what were the factors then? The influence of political regimes, the effects of economic factors, and the ramifications of political and social relations between women and men. Okay, so this is an important sentence. I'll read it again. In addition, Duverger's discussion of his findings was hampered by his failure to consider. So there are some things Duverger did not consider, which were the influence of political regimes, the effects of economic factors, and the ramifications of political and social relations between women and men. Alright, given this failure, Duverger's study foreshadowed the enduring limitations of the behavioralist approach to the multinational study of women's political participation. Foreshadowed means to show the way or something. So, so basically what this last sentence says is Duverger's study had the same limitations as the general limitations of the behavioralist approach to the study of women's political participation. So the entire passage is more like an evaluation, I'd say, because the author says good things about Duverger, also points out problems with his research. So it's an evaluation sort of passage. The first paragraph talks about this particular work and how it was unique in a particular aspect. It was the first one to use election data and survey data. It also tells us something about women's voting patterns. In the second paragraph, it says a couple of good things about the work, also points out a problem with the work, that it ignores certain things, and then says the work is pretty much in line with the general behavioralist approach in terms of the limited or the things that he does not consider. So So it says, then goes on to say that the work is pretty similar or representative of the problems which the behaviorist approach faces in general. Okay, so having understood the passage, now let's look at the questions. And the first one is the primary purpose of the passage, question number 87. So primary purpose, as I said, evaluate was the perfect word. When I look at the first words of every option, A starts with evaluate, I like it a lot. B starts with summarize, C with report, D with reinterpret, wrong word, E with reconcile, wrong word. There's nothing being reinterpreted or reconciled anywhere in the passage. So A, B, C says report new research findings. The passage is not reporting new research findings. B says summarize the history of a research area is too broad. The passage is only about Maurice Duverger's work. A, I think, is perfect. Evaluate is the perfect word, and evaluate a research study is the perfect summary of what's happening broadly in the passage. So A should be the answer to our question.